Hey everyone, I'm Stephanie, and I believe that all readers should read children's literature, especially adults. So that's what we do on the Kid Lit Love podcast. We celebrate all things children's literature, picture books, early readers, middle grade, and young adult novels too. Whether you're an adult reading to your inner child or connecting the young readers in your lives with fantastic books, you've come to the right place. Each week, we'll talk to a different children's literature author and discuss their books, their hopes and dreams for readers, their writing process, and much, much more. So, grab a notebook to build your TBR, and let's get to today's episode of Kid Lit Love. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm Stephanie, your Kid Lit loving host, inviting you back for another weekly conversation with a children's literature author. Today, I am thrilled to be talking with Laura Gell, an award-winning author of more than 50 board books, picture books, and early readers. You might recognize titles like One Big Pair of Underwear, the Peep and Egg series, My Pillow Keeps Moving, Odd Birds, and one of my favorites, Apple and Magnolia. She's here today to talk about her newest picture book, Saving Delicia. Laura, welcome to the Kid Lit Love podcast. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, well, the pleasure is all mine. I am in awe of anyone who can write and publish 50 books. And I've shared so many of them with my students, with my own children, now in my work with teachers and adults. And I would love for you to start at the beginning of that career. How did you get here? Because I know from poking around a little bit about you that wasn't necessarily the first career you had. And that fascinates me. So I'd love if you'd give us your backstory.
Sure. So my first career was as a teacher, and I loved teaching, but mostly I didn't teach reading. I taught a little bit of reading. Mostly I taught science. And then in Massachusetts, where I was teaching, you need to have at least a master's to continue teaching in the long term. And I ended up deciding, instead of going back to school to get a master's, to go back to school for something else that I was really interested in, and go ahead and get my PhD in neuroscience. And so that's what I did. And it was an amazing time. I learned so much. I was working in a lab every day. And it was incredible. But as I got married and had my first child, I started to worry that being in the lab every day was not flexible enough for the kind of parenting that I wanted to do. And so I started writing about science. And so that was my first writing career, really, was as a science writer. And I wrote mostly for magazines and academic publications. I wrote for all ages, from babies up through adults. And then I started thinking, as I became a mom, about writing children's books. But as probably every single person who's ever tried to get into this business has discovered, it was much harder than I thought. I actually thought, since I had this teaching background and I had the writing background and I had the science background, that I would write science books for kids. And it turned out I was really bad at it. I thought I would be a natural, and I wasn't at all. And it's because writing magazine articles and writing picture books about science are so different. And I was basically writing book-length magazine articles. I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And so it took me a really long time to figure out how to actually write picture books about science. And so the first books I published ended up being fiction and not being science at all. But I wrote One Big Pair of Underwear, which you mentioned, when my oldest son was a baby. And then it finally came out when he was 10. So there was 10 years in there of just trying to get better at writing and eventually trying to find an agent, getting an agent. So it was a long process, but I love, love, love writing. So I was always writing and happy writing. And I was also doing a lot of other things, more science writing and editing and lots of parenting. All four of my kids were born by the time the
Wow.
first book came out. So it was a journey, but I feel so lucky to have gotten there in the end and to have been able to keep doing this now for 10 years since that first book came out.
Wow. So from teacher to neuroscience to writing, it sounds like you're really good at just following what feels right and feels good and whatever that next step is based on what's going on in your life. I so admire people who can just pivot and turn and do that. So I love that about your journey.
Yeah, I do think that being able to pivot is something that I am good at. I never thought of it like that, but I think that that also helps me in my writing a lot because I do a lot of very vicious revising where I cut out huge amounts of text or I switch perspectives. And I think it is a lot easier for me to do that than it is for many writers. And so I guess it's that same ability to pivot quickly that just happens to be something
Yeah.
that I have. So yeah.
Well, I admire it for sure. I think I fall in the other category of the let me hang on to my words and my routines and my everything. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there. You'll be a good role model for that in my own life. Now, I also read on your website we share a favorite book. I love and have used and read this book with almost every group of students I have ever met. Um, The Big Orange Splot.
Oh yeah, it's so
Colombian.
fantastic. I have a picture book manuscript that's out on submission. Who knows if it will ever sell and become a book, but it was inspired by
Oh,
that. And so we'll see. I if it ends up happening, I'll definitely let you know more details, but that is such a fantastic book that always stays with me. And I'm so glad to hear that you're sharing it with kids today because I think most kids today don't know it, which
I
is
agree. I agree. Every group that I have put it in front of, every group of teachers that I have read it to then hopefully bring to their classroom, no one ever knows about it. And so it is exciting when you can do that. And I love it because it's just such a good reminder to just be you and be authentic and figure out what you want your life and your world to look like and just go do it. And if people disagree with you, have a little chat with them with some lemonade and it'll all work out.
great. It is such a great message. And also that book really is kind of about pivoting and the ability to pivot, going back to what we were talking
Yeah.
about. So
Oh,
yeah, I
that's
hope everyone
exciting.
listening to this will go out and read it if they haven't already.
Yes, I hope so. And then I hope that I can read your version of something that was inspired by it. That's exciting to know too.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
Oh.
We'll see.
Well, on another side note, lima beans are my favorite too. So
Oh, yeah, I'm excited because it's almost fresh lima bean season, which are always the best. I like the frozen ones too, but the fresh ones
yeah,
are
I'll take
special.
them all. I'm the only one in my family who feels that way. So when I saw that little note on your website, because you have such a beautiful website with, truths and a lie and all the things about you, and I thought, oh, we are destined to chat between loving Mr. Plumbian and loving lima beans. We're a good fit.
Yeah, for sure.
So today we're here primarily to talk about your newest picture book, Saving Delicia. And in my review online, I called it utterly delightful. It's just beautiful. It's beautiful in words, obviously, and in the pictures, but the messages behind it. I loved it had, at least for me, the themes of friendship, especially friendship across generations, about how important just one little person and one little action could be. And you also have such good information on, environmental preservation. You really pack a lot of wonderful topics and goodness in this book. And I'd love for you to tell readers a little bit about it in your own words. Give a little sneak peek, but tell us about your newest one.
Sure. So this book is about a little girl named Kari, and she lives in a town where there's this beautiful tree, a Delicia tree, and it's not a real kind of tree. I made it up.
I went and
And
Googled. I was writing Google, like, let me see this tree.
right. And I was so curious to see how Patricia, the illustrator whose work I love so much, how she would decide to envision this tree. And honestly, it looks so much like it looked in my heart and in my imagination. So she did an amazing job bringing the Delicia tree to life. But anyway, so Kari lives in this town where there's this one Delicia tree left. There used to be, you know, hundreds of them. And now, because of blight, there's only one left, and everyone in town shares its fruit. And Kari is worried about what will happen if this last tree dies. So that's kind of the setup for the book. And she has this friend, old Otis. You mentioned cross-generational friendship. And so Kari and old Otis have a beautiful relationship, which was sort of inspired by when I was a kid. I had in my town, we had a volunteering opportunity where kids could go and just chat with senior citizens who maybe were a little bit lonely and had signed up for this program. And so I made a good friend through that program. And you know, having a friend who's a few generations older than you is just so different from having a friend your own age. And I think we both got a lot out of it. And so that was kind of the seed of inspiration for that part of the book. So that's Saving Delicia. I won't give too much away, but it was such a joy to write, and an even bigger joy to get to see Patricia illustrate it with her incredible style.
Yes, as I mentioned in the introduction, Apple and Magnolia, it's just one of my favorites. I actually have read it to countless groups of teachers over the past, as soon as it came out. I had it in my hands pretty soon. And so when I saw that this book was also the same duo, I loved being able to make that connection. There's just something so unique about her illustrations and the color schemes that she uses across both of them that they just really bring it to life. And I loved in Saving Delicia the beauty of that tree and the seeds. So I'm always so interested because I know that at least at the beginning, authors and illustrators are often paired together by someone else. And I'm curious of how, did you get to pick this pairing, this go round, or was it just a natural next step to have the two of you do this together again?
Yeah, good question. It was my editor's idea. And she had worked with me on the American edition of Apple and Magnolia, and she was the one who suggested that Patricia would be the perfect person to illustrate Saving Delicia, and I completely agreed. I was so thrilled when she suggested it, and it could not have been a more perfect match. And like you said, the two books have a lot in common. We've been referring to them as companion books. Certainly it's not a sequel. It's not the same characters. It's not in the same place, but both of the books started with kind of a nonfiction concept that I wanted to introduce to kids, but they're both fictional stories with characters that hopefully readers will identify with and fall in love with. And so they are very similar in those ways.
Now, in this book, as I mentioned, the beauty of those seeds, the beauty of that Delicia tree, that yes, I was at Google before I read your author's note. I was not patient enough to get to the end. The idea of those seeds, and again, without, I hate giving spoilers, so I don't want to go too far into the book like you did, you stopped as well. You do have a nice science element in there. And you have at the end, you talk about the fact that the Delicia seed is not, or the Delicia tree is not real. However, it does represent this bigger idea in the environment. And you talk about the Global Seed Project. And now knowing a little bit about your background, is this your way of keeping that science writing and that thread that you have going?
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of my ideas for picture books come from just reading about science. I still spend a lot of time reading about science, and so I get ideas. And this one did come from reading about seed banks and this fall. I'm gonna say it wrong. Let me make sure hold on one sec. I even wrote it down for myself to make sure I wasn't gonna mess it up, and then I forgot to put it in a convenient place. The Svalbard, that's the word I always get wrong. Svalbard Global Seed Vault. Reading about that was just so eye-opening for me, and there are other seed banks all around the world, and reading about some of the stories, I was just so inspired, and I figured it was a topic that a lot of kids probably hadn't heard about. So that was sort of where the story started, was me reading about seed banks and thinking, how can I, write a book that introduces this topic in a kid-friendly way?
Well, this adult didn't know that they existed.
Yeah,
So
well, I didn't until shortly before I started reading this book.
yeah.
So
And what I loved for me, and I think it's my nature as well, but I think teachers are really great at doing this in the classroom, that the book did send me down a little rabbit hole of sorts, because I was on Google trying to see about this tree, but then I went and looked up the seed projects and learned more about them as well. And so your book was like this spark that made me learn about something I didn't know before, that is this fascinating and very needed idea. And I imagine this will happen in classrooms everywhere when they read
I,
this.
yeah, I hope so. I heard a podcast recently where Neil deGrasse Tyson was saying that everyone should feel awe at least a few times a week, and that if you're not, then you're not living your life right. And I think that nature is something that often brings that feeling of awe to me, and also being in nature for sure, but also just reading about the natural world. I feel so much awe when I learn about different aspects of our environment and different trees and different plants and different animals. And so that's something I do regularly. And it really does ignite my brain. So the idea of kids reading this book and then wanting to learn more is very exciting to me, and definitely one of my goals when I write books like this.
I am writing that down. We all need to feel awe a couple of times a week.
Yeah, I think he put it better than I am misquoting him for sure, but that was the gist of it. And yeah, it really stayed with me.
I love that because, I mean, nature, as you mentioned, nature can do that, but in here, books did that. Your book did that for me, which then just, had this nice domino effect. I love that. It's going on a sticky note and it's going up
Wonderful.
the wall. So I'm curious, how are you with seeds? Do you have a green thumb? Are you a gardener?
So I am an enjoyer of seeds, let's say. One of the things you mentioned is how beautiful the seeds are in the book. And that was something I felt really strongly about, how gorgeous seeds
Yeah.
can be. And I spent so much time just looking at pictures of real seeds, and they come in so many colors and shapes and sizes. And I found that really inspirational when thinking about seeds and seed banks. And I am not a gardener at all. During the pandemic, we grew some tomatoes, and it was really cool. But that was pretty much our only foray into gardening in the last few decades. The idea that you have to just constantly water them and you have to constantly weed them, it's just
Yeah.
to me it's stressful and not relaxing. But I love eating all the the produce that friends and family and farmers grow. And I really find seeds as a concept, just the idea that all of this potential is inside this tiny little package. It's just
Yeah.
so cool. So
I
seed
agree with you.
lover, but not gardener.
And same here. I love standing in that section of whatever store you're in, the garden section, and you see all the little cups that you could buy and all the little pellets, and then you have just the wall of seeds. And every time I just stand there and I stop and I look at it and I think, oh my goodness, what could I grow? And then I laugh because I know I cannot grow anything. But I do enjoy, I think you capture it so perfectly. I love the fact that that's so much possibility right there. And I enjoy looking at gardens. I enjoy, like you said, eating them. I just have never been able to pull it off other than my potted tomato plant. Yep, I can do that. And that is about all I have. I don't have a green thumb. Have you ever read, it's an adult fiction book. It is called The Garden of Small Beginnings.
I think so. Who's the author?
Abby Waxman.
Yes, yes, I
I
have read.
was thinking of that book because it is about planting a garden and they are very obsessed with their seeds. And it has this wonderful nonfiction part throughout the book about how and what each of those individual seeds needs to grow best. And I just couldn't help but connect to that book as I was reading your picture book.
Yeah, I feel like I read a fair amount of books where people are gardening, just like I read a lot of books where people are knitting, and I love them, even though I personally
Yeah.
cannot knit. It's just, again, it's like the potential. You start with this
Yes.
wool or yarn, and then it turns into a sweater or a scarf or a blanket. And I love that people are capable of that, even if those people are not me.
Right. It goes back to that awe that you were saying is just so important to you. And while you may not have the magic touch with seeds or yarn, you certainly do with words. And so that's yours. That's that's your area that works quite well for you.
Right. Yeah.
So in thinking about your philosophy, you mentioned you like to bring in those, the pieces of awe, the things that you didn't know, those end up being sparks for books. What is your hope when students are reading it, or maybe teachers or caregivers are reading it with their kids? What do you hope that they'll get out of your books?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So every time I'm writing a book, I think about what we call the so what, but it's not the same for every book. I do write a lot of books where the so what might be learning about a new scientific topic or learning facts, but I also write books where the biggest so what is just for kids to laugh. And I think that's really important too, because that's one of the things that turns kids into lifelong readers. And sometimes I write books where the so what is to hopefully help a kid who's struggling with grief or anxiety or, fears. And so I think books can do all these different sorts of things. And I like to try to write books that do all these sorts of things. I remember years ago hearing that you should have a brand, and I definitely don't have a brand because I write in many different directions. And I remember talking to a friend, and she said maybe the brand can just be books that kids really like.
Yes.
So I guess that's what I'm going for. I do feel awe about all the different things that books can accomplish, and I hope that my books can touch on a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a pretty good brand right there. Awe for what books can accomplish and that your books do all of those things for kids. I think that's a beautiful brand and a beautiful philosophy. So how are you bringing that philosophy to life in the future? I know you've got some new books on the horizon. We'd love a sneak peek about them.
Yeah, and I guess if you look at the rest of the books I have coming out this year, it just shows all the different types of books I like to write. I have the next book that will come out next month is called You're the Sprinkles on My Ice Cream, and it's a
Oh,
board book that's like very lovey-dovey, and it shows the love between a caregiver and a child. And then I also have coming out this spring a box set of early readers where there's 6 different early readers, and they are all made for the kids who are just starting to be able to read independently. So that's a whole other kind of book where, the so what of those books is for the kid to be so excited that they read a book on their own. And actually, those are some of the books I've gotten the most letters from parents about her now. They're mostly emails saying, this was the first book my kid ever read, and he/she/they were so excited to make it through. And so with those books, I try to make them funny to encourage the new reader, but it's a very different kind of writing. And then in the summer, because winter books tend to come out in the summer, I have a picture book coming out called Snow Is, that's very lyrical. It's in rhyme, and it just celebrates the magic of that first snow day of the season. And
That
then
magic never gets old, no matter how old you are.
no,
That first snow
exactly.
day is always it.
And then I have Robot Shabbat is coming out in November. And so that one is like a Jetsons twist on getting ready for Shabbat. So that is a Jewish book. So I'm writing in all these different directions all the time. And that's how I prefer to work, to be working on many different projects that are really different from each other at any given time.
Well, and that just means so many more readers will be able to have their entry point and to find themselves or to find something different than themselves and to learn and grow and explore. You just do have such a beautiful range of books for readers to start with, but then, you've got picture books and board books and early readers. You can grow with them too, which is a beautiful thing to think about also.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's really special to think of a kid progressing through the different books.
Yeah. Well, as a former first grade teacher, kindergarten, first grade intervention teacher, like that's where my brain goes, because what hooks the student in, like you said, that first book, that first early reader, that first early chapter book, if you can hook them there, you've got fans for life with kids that will keep following you. And you
Right.
certainly have a big backlist for everyone to explore, which is just so, as I said, it's just so impressive and amazing that you can do that work in so many different ways and touch so many readers,
Oh,
including
thank
me.
you.
You're
I really
welcome.
appreciate that.
So where can listeners find more about you?
Well, like you said, I have a website, and it's just my name, lauragale.com. And so that's probably the best place. It has all my books on there, and each book links to places you could buy the books. And there's also lots of coloring sheets and educator guides on the website for caregivers to download and print, or educators to download and print for their classes.
Great. Is there any social media platform that you're on that we could link to as well?
So I'm at author Laura Gale on let's see, Instagram and Facebook and Blue Sky and Twitter/X, but I can't say that I'm much of a social media maven or presence. I try to post when there's news, but I'm not a very consistent poster.
It's hard. It's hard to keep up. I mean, look how many books you're writing. I think we could cut you some slack for not
Yeah, there's only so much you can do, and I would always rather be writing than be on social media.
Yes.
So,
Well, and we appreciate that. Well, thank you so much, Laura, for coming on to the podcast. I've loved chatting with you, getting to know more about your backstory, the philosophy behind your books, and I'll be sure to put all the links of where they can find you on the show notes, along with those social media handles that they could check out if they want, and links to the books that we talked about too today.
okay, thank you so much for having me. It was really a joy to talk to you.
It was. Thank you. And listeners, thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you inside the next episode of the Kidlit Love podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Kidlit Love podcast. You'll find links to all the books, resources, and ideas mentioned in the show notes at alitlife.com. And if you want more, you might like to listen to my other podcast called Get Literate. It's a podcast that explores all things books and reading, notebooks and writing, and everything in between to build a life you love. One more thing. If you love what you listened to today, please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, or take a screenshot of the episode and text it to a bookish friend. This helps the podcast grow and builds our bookish community of kid lit love. Thanks for listening.